Hello and greetings to everybody. Thank you very, very much for joining us at our United Europe panel discussion on open innovation. It's challenging today, I think, for most people who are on the panel and in the audience. Sorry, I'm just letting some more in there. It's rather hot in most locations, rather uncomfortable, difficult work. So we'll just jump right in. A little bit about United Europe. We're a non-profit organization and our goal are threefold. That is the promotion of the unity, diversity and competitiveness of Europe. That being said, innovation and open innovation, I believe, and we'll learn more today, are crucial for the competitiveness side of our three goals. So that is why it is important for us to have this event today. We have, thank you all for the panelists, and we have 5 panelists for you. We've got Ms. Nicola Baer, who's our keynote speaker, and she is the Vice President of the European Parliament and a member of the Freie Demokratische Partei in Germany, and in the Parliament itself, she's a member of the now known as the Renew Group. More importantly, in the context of this discussion, she's part of the ITRE committee, which is the Committee on Industry, Research and Energy. We're also joined by Magda Krakowiak. She's head of open innovation at the EIT Health, and she leads a team of innovation managers responsible for the design and implementation of the Open Innovation Programme. And that includes the identification of needs, program design, recruitment scouting, and program execution. So useful hands-on experience there. We also have Ms. Oana Maria Popp, and she's a strategy and innovation management consultant. Her core interest is the science of durable inter-firm relationships and collaboration. Her background is in the intersection of publishing and online education, management, research, and management consulting. We also have Professor Lynn, full professor of digital business in the Dublin City University Business School. He's established 3 information communication technology companies and grew them himself. He's brought those products from those companies, professional service to marketing, and he has 15 years experiences teaching strategy and digital marketing at postgraduate level. On a human level, I'd like to just share with the audience, just to kind of break a bit of ice here. The last time that Theo and I spoke was, I think, in 1995 in person. We haven't spoken on the phone. We've been in touch a little bit on LinkedIn, but at that time, and I hope it's not embarrassing for you, Theo, it's more of a badge of honor. You had your very first startup. You were just post-college, and it was in a few cramped offices over what I think was a dance hall or a cinema someplace along Camden Street in Dublin. Do you remember that, with those old computers?
Oh yeah, you're going back. I don't even put that on my CV. Yeah.
Anyway, let me carry on with the introductions
now. That pool hall is famously, for if you watch the Commitments film, that's the rehearsal space for the Commitments, but also apparently was famously where a famous Irish criminal, the General, used to hang out. So I was very naive back then in terms of my rental spaces, but nightclub culture, what can I say? The 90s, can't remember much of it.
Yeah.
I'm sure you were there.
We'll have to take it up. And the disadvantage of these Zoom events is that we can't have a sidebar discussion at the bar after the event. But Theo, we have to catch up on that. Sorry for the sidebar there. That's a little bit of an Irish thing, an Irish connection. Finally, last but not least, our final panelist is Miss Aurelia Engelsberg. She has pursuing academic research. She teaches at university level herself, but she also works as a consultant in the field of open innovation, and she pays special attention to knowledge exchange barriers in cultural and functional diverse teams. She's currently working on the development of an employee-centered digital open innovation platform that reduces the entry barriers for organizations to invest in their open innovation culture. So with that, we're familiar with all of our panelists. I'll hand over to our keynote speaker, Ms. Nicola Baer, Vice President of the European Parliament. Ms. Baer, please have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, James. And thank you for inviting me. I think you have the most interesting and one of the most important topics this evening, how to foster innovation. And when I looked at the EU-US summit this week, I saw that Joe Biden, the American president, underlined the need of economic growth when he said the best answer to dealing with the changes in the world is for our economies to grow. and to grow together on the foundation of our shared values. And I think this is really a good quotation. I totally see it and share President Biden's view. We are living in a rapidly changing world, but I'm convinced that we can turn this for a better future of every of our citizens. I mean, we see the digitization, and this is really leading in the fourth industrial revolution. A system change will leave many people unemployed in the first moment, but a change which will create also new chances, new opportunities, creating new working world and new jobs and wealth. But only if we are innovative enough and skilling, upskilling, reskilling our people. The climate crisis, take it, is forcing us to decarbonize our economies and our life. This again is a really big challenge. We have huge discussions, not only in the parliament, but especially in the member states. We have to prevent that there is a social gap coming on. But I think that we can challenge this. We can really go ahead, but we will need green growth and we will need innovation to solve those problems. And if you see on the Cold War, which is now over, and the old bipolar world changed into a multipolar one, with China, with Russia becoming stronger and questioning our Western democratic values, then I think we will have to prove that liberal democracies can both technological leadership on the base of our values, and I think this is, especially in the comparison with China, really important, and sustainable growth to ensure the wealth of our citizens. So, ladies and gentlemen, economy is not an end by itself. If we want to shape our future for the sake of our citizens, we need a strong economy in Europe. And the only way to achieve this, there I'm quite sure, is by innovation. So how to improve this innovation in Europe? First of all, politics cannot prescribe innovation. I think this is really important because I see too often, especially in the discussion in Parliament, politicians who want to explain this now is innovation. We have to do this, we have to subsidize this. This is the wrong way around. So what politics can do and has also to do is to create an environment, conditions, a framework which fosters innovation, but especially which let the space really to the scientists, to the entrepreneurs, to make the creativity go in that, and not to define what is the right innovation, neither to digitalize nor to make Green Deal. Really have to be technology open, and we have really to be also have the ambitious and also the courage to let them do, because they are responsible of what they are doing. I do not mistrust those people. We are depending on for innovation, but we have let them do and not hinder them by burdens in different ways. Second point for me is innovation needs people, smart people. Where does these people come from? Because I really want to make Europe the place to be for everybody who is interested in innovation, who is curious, who is ambitious, who wants to change, and who is also courage enough to go ways nobody went before. And so we have really to see first, on the first hand, to invest in our education system. I think we can improve a bit more in those systems, and for me this is really an investment. This is not just giving money somewhere. This is really an investment because Europe's future innovators are going to school today. So the best possible education for our children is key if we want a generation who will be able to shape the future. And there maybe we have also a little bit to look in our curricula, because for me, especially I can say it from the German discussion, we do not really give them the spirit, the attitude of entrepreneurship. So it's more, I try to have a job with a long contract. I want to be safe. I think we have to show them that there is another world around to make this attitude coming up in Europe all over. The second point is that education does not stop at end of school. I think with those changes coming up more and more quicker, We see that we have to change. Everybody has to change the long of his life. So lifelong learning in order to get those back on jobs and to hold them, also those in jobs today, is, and in my opinion, is really important if we will really tackle with this changing in the digital environment and also in the green environment. And we need, and this is really a mistake that we come not further with this in European Union, we need immigration of the brightest minds. So really to be the place to be, also from people coming from outside, not only improving, but even if this is really, really important, I hope you heard this, improving our own people, but really to be as attractive as possible in the so-called war of talents is important. Third point, I think we need more cooperation. The contest of ideas means the research institutes need to exchange their knowledge, extend their networks, exchange their people, and that we need to bundle also our resources for innovation, for research in the United Europe together with its member states. I was a member of national parliament in Germany. I saw the small budget the minister took, for example, in disruptive innovation. And I always said, please go ahead with your 26 colleagues in Europe, with the European budget, make something which is really big to invest in innovation, in scientists, in everybody who has a crazy idea and could develop. So I think we really have to go on this way, because ideas flow worldwide. Research does not stop at boundaries. And that means that Europe will become more innovative if we act more globally. There is a big danger, I think, in this field because of the ongoing strategic and autonomy debate. It's already had also hit the scientific sphere when we saw some of the programs now more being limited towards Israel, towards Switzerland and others. So I really would like to go against this misuse of the discussion of resilience, strategic autonomy to create a protectionist post-COVID world in Europe. Europe must be the place where every scientist, academic, and researcher find the best conditions to work in the world and should attract the smartest people all over the world. Fourth point, we have to become faster in implementing changes. Europe is a lot too slow in adapting its administrative structures and institutions to the new world, too slow in adapting our regulation. We have to change maybe also the style of regulating, because we are always regulating really in the details. I think we need a new style of regulating as a framework, really a huge one, so that within this framework we can adapt, because those changes are quite more quicker than we can go behind as regulators. And we are too slow in commercializing ideas. We need more incubators at university campus and more academic teachers who encourage students to put their ideas into real life products. And last but not least, because every time the question of money is in, we need more venture capital. We see too often leaving people with really good ideas, with innovation quality on the track, because they do not get the second round for financing. And then are bite out or go ahead to have this finance. So for those next venture capital rounds, we have to make it possible that they can have a successful business here in Europe without leaving us. So more venture capital is needed. We need to change financial and tax regulation in order to attract more private capital to this. So, and as I mentioned in the beginning, innovation which leads to economic growth is not an end by itself. Just to mention, we will not be able to defend our values, our human rights, and our concept of freedom based on the individual if we are not economically strong. Only the front runner is setting standards worldwide. And we have the opportunity to set these standards on the base of our values. We need to explain to our citizens that green and innovative growth is not an environmental threat, but the answer to our current problems. And in this way, I think we have, and I hope we will foster innovation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Bear. A very broad analysis of the situation in Europe, not just in relation to innovation, but I think more generally. But innovation, certainly at the heart of it, is potentially one of the keys to the solution of many of our problems. I did appreciate your reference there, particularly to something that chimes deeply with United Europe, and that is around the question of diversity and your emphasis on the need of immigration of the brightest minds, the competition for talent. We've seen that in play in real life, I think, in the context of BioNTech and the two people who led the discovery of the first vaccine. It just underlines why it's important to have immigration and have this sort of fertilization of research across the board in Europe. And it's going to be a tough competition to win those over, because we've got to compete with the that are offered in like the US and A. Magda, perhaps you could open up from the point of view of the panel and either take up some of the points that were raised by Vice President Bear or your own views to the table.
Of course. Thank you so much, James. Thank you, Ms. Bear, for sharing your thoughts, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I'm really pleased to be here. Open innovation is something very dear to my heart. This is the place where I spend my days and where I put my energy, basically into connecting people and working for the benefit of Europe. So you touched upon two very important points, which very much resonate with me, especially the one on education, on the importance of the education and bringing entrepreneurship to our educational curricula, because I think that one of the major roadblocks for the open innovation in Europe is essentially the mindset and kind of a cultural, let's say, resistance to taking risk. As you said, you referenced those, let's say, the benefits of safety, of having long employment contracts, etc. So this both references to, let's say, ordinary people who could potentially be exploring entrepreneurial paths, but also to researchers and people who are basically, I think, afraid to fail in a sense. We very much ponder on the culture of success, and from my, let's say, observations, I can see that the fact that we do kind of the public likes those stories of people starting in garages and be self-made men and so on. This is not really how it happens, right? This is just a myth that is being repeated over and over. And what open innovation is about is essentially about the culture of sharing and the culture of collaborating. And this is something that we still have a long way to go to achieve the level that would be putting us at this speed that you mentioned, that is very much needed. I think that for my work, I mean, very often people from outside of the bubble, they say, okay, you are head of open innovation. What does it actually mean, open innovation, and so on? And I think that still in society in general, we don't understand what the innovation is about. So we make invention with innovation, while inventions are being essentially, it's creating something new, of course, but innovations sometimes are very simple. They do not have to be costly, and they can have very far-reaching impact. So I really like one of my mentors and people that I'm very proud to work with always says that that research is when you take money and you translate them into knowledge, but innovation is when you take knowledge and you translate this into money. So I think this is something very simple, but it captures very well on what the conversation is actually about. So we are talking about commercializing. We're not talking about inventing new stuff. We're talking about connecting things in order to create growth. That was the underlying thread of your keynote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Magda. We can move then to Juana Maria Pop. You want to jump in there, Oana?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Ms. Beer. Thank you, Magda, very much. I think both of us see this quite similarly. Maybe just a little disclaimer. My title is also Head of Open Innovation, and I also need to explain that to some of our customers. But essentially what we try and do is to either establish an open innovation function or to try and improve an existing open innovation function within organizations. Essentially, we try and open up their internal innovation infrastructure to the external world. So whether that is startups, suppliers, citizens, competitors sometimes, and that can take different facets. So for me, the educational component of your speech, Ms. Beer, is crucial, but more so than that is the cooperation element. I remember from grad school when we were trying to break down the concept of collaboration into different parts, I stumbled upon some interesting work, and that work explained that it was the work of Robert Axelrod. They explained that collaboration has two facets essentially. So you have the cooperation aspect, which is why is it that we want to work together in the first place? What are our joint goals? Why are we here in the room? Is it a wicked challenge that we're trying to solve, such as decarbonization, or is it something else? There's the other component of coordination. So how do we do that? So if we agree that there is something for us to work on here together, and that need is very important to us, potentially to our survival, of course, and to our competitiveness, to other aspects, how do we create that infrastructure? And for me, that is the key. I work day in, day out with creating those kinds of infrastructures, whether it's for the European Space Agency. They have the Open Space Innovation Platform now, where they try to enable all the bright minds, is not only postdocs or scientists working in that field, to participate in calls to promote their ideas and to then materialize and sort of commercialize those ideas. But it can also be something as simple as involving consumers in the development of products and services. To me, that infrastructure is essential. If there is no meeting point, if there is no way to take stock of those ideas, maybe to go back to old ones. Magda probably also knows that herself. From one year to the other, there might be opportunities to revive certain ideas or certain insights. And maybe it's just because of the profession, but to me, those are some of the key elements. And recently, because we did need to operate during COVID, one thing that I certainly learned is that you cannot really walk straight or innovate straight, so to speak, when the road is bent. What we need is flexibility. And I think having an infrastructure together with the right mindset can offer that flexibility. If there is a gateway for innovation in place, if there are roles assigned to innovation, if this function is demystified, if people understand the workflow, what happens to their intellectual property and so on, that builds so much confidence, and that opens up possibilities and the imagination of the participants. Often what happens is that open innovation starts maybe in one corner of the organization, but suddenly it spreads because the benefits are noticeable and quantifiable. So that's at least my viewpoint, because that's where I see the struggle, and well, try to provide some answers.
Thanks, Oana. And maybe at the end, we'll go and have a little round robin, get the sort of top 2 things from each of you that need to happen in Europe for open innovation to get a better grip and a better advance. So have a think about that while we go to Professor Theo Lynn in Dublin. Theo, you want to jump in with your view?
All these women with lots of great ideas here. So I feel like, geez, what am I, a balls-wide fat Irish guy? Okay, so I suppose just to pick up on some things. I mean, I suppose I'm in a unique position that, you know, I was an entrepreneur for a long time, and then I went into academia. I suppose I come from the west coast of Ireland, which is less economically well developed, has less digital penetration than the rest of the country. And my family's from a place called Killala, which actually has more broadband per square inch than anywhere else in Europe, because that's where the pipe from the US stands. And yet there's no broadband in that town. Is terrible, okay? And when we talk about open innovation, you know, for me, it's about open collaboration. And one of the things about that, I'll come back to Kalala in a minute, but one of the things about open collaboration is it's a very counterintuitive idea for many people, whether it's politicians or whether it's businesses or particularly academia, in that really at its heart, it involves collaborating with strangers. And collaborating with strangers or doing anything with strangers is a very difficult thing, you know. And so particularly, you know, you talk about giving away IP and it's like, oh, I'm giving this to people, what are they going to do with it? And even when you think about all the vast amounts of money we spend on Horizon 2020 and now Horizon Europe, I'm always quite skeptical about whether some of this really good output is actually getting exploited 4 or 5 years down the road, etc. And part of that is to do with this innate idea that you need to keep and own and keep control of this IP, which inevitably is not exploited. If you look at licenses across universities in Europe, we're not very good at licensing and getting that IP out to market. And keeping it, we don't do much with it. So, you know, my basic belief, in particularly in our school, in a business school, I don't think a business school has any role to play in keeping control of IP. So from my perspective, we have an open IP policy, which is just give non-exclusive royalty-free licenses to people to use the IP and get it out to the market as fast as possible. So I think, first of all, you know, it's a very difficult concept for people, even though they think that they understand it. And now going back to Kalala, I bring up this point is, we talked about open innovation in Europe, and of course, there's a kind of a divide there. I don't want to call it, it's like an innovation divide. And it's an innovation divide between East and Western Europe, and that's still there. And I know that the new Horizon Europe and digital society policy are doing a lot to invest and to balance that out. So I think we're doing actually making progress there. But it's also a divide between young and old. It's a divide between rural and urban. So if you go in and you look at SMEs, say in Ireland, and rural SMEs, which are about 37% of areas in Ireland are rural, just to put it into context, they're nearly all micro enterprises. They're sub 10 employees. So 98% or something are sub 10 employees, okay? And I think that's largely the case for most of, particularly Eastern Europe, a lot of Europe. And they typically do a lot less innovation than the rest of society, the rest of businesses. And what's more particularly interesting there is, even if you look at Euromonitor and the Digital Economic and Social Index, it does not count micro enterprises. It only counts businesses that are over 10 employees. So these really small businesses, many of which are startups, we don't even recognize their existence. But when we look at studies, and there are very few studies, rural SMEs and particularly micro enterprises are less, and I put this in inverted commas, innovative than larger companies and their urban peers, okay? And that some of that has to do with distance to market and proximity to market, but also proximity to universities, etc. Because obviously rural areas tend not to have research hubs, okay? And I think that both ladies, actually all three ladies spoke earlier, I'll mention this idea of mindset. I think that's really important, but it's really important to tease that out, because a mindset, particularly in a marketing context, it changes depending on your context. So, you know, what's interesting about BioNTech in the context of COVID-19, when we have a perceived need, and that need is very real, has high stakes, and it's proximate to us, we're able to corral our resources and do something innovative. But when something's very psychologically distant, it's much more difficult to actually collaborate and bring resources together to identify. And that kind of explains the difference between, say, climate change and COVID-19. COVID-19 is very real for everybody. It's right front and center in our mindset. We want to get that vaccination. Well, at least 84% of us do. And, you know, in the context of climate change, it seems very, very far away. And, you know, while I've been to Svalbard and I've seen the polar bears, for most people, a polar bear losing his iceberg is something that's from a storybook, whereas COVID-19 or losing a loved one because of COVID-19 or social distancing is their here and now reality. And I think that that's a massive challenge in terms of making innovation psychologically proximate to people's requirements, and particularly businesses. And then if you think about rural businesses, you know, they're trying to survive. Just to put into context, a rural business in Ireland has about 3 weeks of cash liquidity. Okay, so you shut them down for a couple of months, they have no weeks of liquidity. Okay, so that's what they're worried. They're worried about survival, whereas innovation is sometime down the road.
Professor Lynn, if you could maybe just wrap up and we'll come
all right,
back
there you
to
go. Well, you're asking a professor to talk. There you go. As I started off with old, white, boring Irish guys, and there you go.
and this is again one of the failings of Zoom. We don't have the sort of post-event discussion opportunities and everything. But to pick up on your point about the micro enterprises and maybe their lack of innovation, just remember, without them, we wouldn't have all of the variety of cheeses, ciders, and wines, and all of the good things that come from rural areas. So let's not be too harsh on them. If I could move now to Aurelia Engelsberger and get her point of view, please.
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm actually really excited to be here and having the insights from the practical side as well as from the academic side. I think that's really exciting, and I'm very happy to hear in every of your speech actually how important the mindset is, because that's actually what I'm focusing on with my work. So I'm actually a psychologist, and I've done my PhD in the field of open innovation, but I really focused a lot on the mindset of people and investigated the role of an open innovation mindset. So I'm really happy to hear that you all put so much importance to that topic. And I think we also need to work together to actually distribute that message, because what I realized in my work as a consultant is that a lot of companies, they still don't really know what open innovation is or what it actually means. And then they start a hackathon here, or they do, you know, like create like an innovation hub, and then they put it on their website big and loud and say, yes, we do open innovation. But if you actually start talking with them about the details, like what's your strategy, like how do you measure your success, you know, then they become really quiet. And I think that's something we really need to foster, that as also Oana Maria said very well, we need an infrastructure and we need a mindset, because I mean, in the end, the employees exchange the knowledge, right? They are the ones who share and source knowledge, so they need to buy in, you know. And of course, we all know that open innovation provides a lot of benefits for the companies, for the industry, and also for the United Union at all. But like, what is really important is to actually show or demonstrate the employees their benefits, like what are the individual benefits they get out of it? Why should they invest their time into that? You know, why should they open up and share their own knowledge if in the end they might get replaced? So we need to reduce those fears and negative attitudes of the employees and build an infrastructure on each level of the organization to establish a really sustainable open innovation culture, and not just some events here and there scattered you know, throughout the organization. It needs to be a holistic approach, and that starts in the mindset of the employees. Of course, we need to show them the benefits, as I said, and we need to reward them, and we need to measure their knowledge exchange. But if we have all the open people in our company, it doesn't really help if we don't have the right conducive leadership style, and if we don't have the systems which really fosters that, you know. So we need to think about KPIs. We really need to think holistically, and that's something I would like to put out here. And also what I think is really important, what all of you touched on, is also the education, because of course we can change a mindset. It's not like a personality. We can really work on a mindset. We can demonstrate benefits, you know, we can get them the experience to learn how beneficial it is if they share knowledge. They build on reciprocity because they usually get something back in the long run. So we can really train and develop a mindset. but it's also important that the new generation is coming in and really foster that open mindset. So it's really important that in the education, like at the university level, this kind of thinking, the collaborative thinking and the benefits also at the individual level is integrated in the curricula. And I couldn't agree more with Mrs. Baer that in Germany, that's not really the case. Like I'm teaching open innovation and I'm teaching remotely in Denmark, or I went to Australia to do open innovation because in Germany, it's just, not that important yet. So yeah, I think that's something we really need to work on and yeah, approach the universities and communicate that message. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Great. That's really a powerful insight. I mean, we look to Germany, at least the rest of Europe looks to Germany as the sort of industrial powerhouse, or one of the industrial powerhouses in the center of Europe, and a source of quite some innovation. But it seems to me like they're doing it with one or both hands tied behind their back. A question just to the general panel, is open innovation something that in its own right, because it's new, can give Europe a competitive edge because it's a new thing? Or is it something where we take up open innovation and actually release a handbrake that we've had on our ability to innovate and be competitive? Is it something new, or is it just where we're sort of unblocking ourselves?
I
like
think, James, I'm let's say, sorry to disappoint, but the open innovation is around the block for 18 years already. So it's adult by all means, but it's definitely, let's say, making its way to the front and center of policy, right? So I was really happy to see with the new framework for the Horizon Europe, all the efforts that have been done with the exploitation of the results. This is something that has been slowly implemented from Framework Program 7 through Horizon 2020, and now this is something that is being considered mandatory, right? So if you look through the document, all the public money that is being pumped into all those wonderful collaborative projects that are popping up around Europe should be, unless they exploit the results of the public money invested in this research or in this innovation, they should be put out for others to use. And there are numerous cases. I mean, I do not probably have such a vast experience as some people maybe here in the call. However, I'm dealing with framework programs and with kind of European policies around research and innovation for the past 8 years. I saw many examples where, for example, startups wanted to use wonderful data collected in frames of a project funded by the European Union, and it was not possible because the data was simply kept by someone who was hoping to use it in the future. So here we are talking about this, let's say, this mindset again of, I'm going to keep it because I worked on it, but you worked on it on the public money. You sponsored it, and you sponsored it. And myself, I sponsored this work. So I think that it should be free for someone who can make actually a use of it and capitalize on this. This data produced in those projects, it should be available for exploitation to others. So I'm very happy to see this change. And I think that this is the step in the right direction in this sense.
Great. So Juana, I saw you nodding your head there. You want to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. I actually have several positive experiences. And I remember that a few years ago, we were in deep discussions with Improve Academy, because one of the things that I believe is very, very important is to know where we are, because we always think, well, oh, other countries or the other regions are doing better, but can we really measure that effectively? So I'm really a fan of benchmarks, even if they're not perfect measures, at least it's a good start. And I remember when we were discussing this issue, and I also remember the methodology that was behind it, how the results were delivered. Essentially, anyone could sign up, could take the questionnaire, and then the results would show them where are you in relation to others in your industry or potentially others of your size. So I think it's more of those that we need, and very much in line with what Magda just mentioned. using or exploiting to the maximum the knowledge in which we've already put a lot of work and a lot of money. And, you know, I work generally with very large organizations, so very large, complex multinationals. And one of the interesting trends that I've noticed is also this trend of more democratizing open innovation, letting others benefit from your know-how, even to the point where they are educating or reskilling their partners. For example, in the supply chain area, we had a really interesting experience both with companies like Veolia, who's now merged with Suez, or with companies like Siemens, who are effectively showing, look, these are our key areas. Would you want to either continue working with us in this area or kind of announce yourself as a new supplier? And we're here to upskill you because we think that by upskilling you will also deliver better results. So I don't think it's the case anymore that things are locked tight. And I think there's plenty of evidence that they're slowly starting to open up, and it's normal that they do it in a slow fashion because nobody knows exactly what happens if we just give away our know-how, and it's completely understandable also because of the means of acquiring that capital or that knowledge. But I don't think there's actually going back from where we are right now. That's my subjective sort of viewpoint.
Okay, if I may share a little secret with the rest of you on the panel and everything, I used to be a lawyer myself. In fact, I worked in the information technology industry, and a lot of that was intellectual property and everything. So I have a bit of a schizophrenic mindset right now. I mean, on the one hand, I've been trained to protect the intellectual property of my client, my company, my customer, my client, and they've invested a lot of time. I've been involved in many negotiations between organizations, you know, with the likes of a software company and Nokia, for example, and the debates and everything were just furious. To, you know, it was all about like joint development and who should own the outcome IP, and it held up a lot of things, and it was, some of those things never even happened. But the reason behind, the logic behind intellectual property rights and things like patent and copyright is, in fact, or the theory is that it's supposed to inspire innovation, because the eventual patent owner is inspired to get that invention out there, and then can gain the fruits of their labor by getting the profits and the licensing, the patent things and so on. And that was a theory, and it worked for quite some time. But now we have the notion of patent trolls, and we have companies like IBM who rack up lots and lots of patents and stuff and sort of secure off that area for themselves, and sometimes it's not adequately exploited. How do we change that mindset, and what is there something we should do, legal framework to kind of unlock that, at least in Europe, and can we do it?
Maybe I might pop in on that one.
Go ahead.
In my past, I think with James, I studied law. I think that it's while patents are great, and they're particularly great where you have a massive investment like pharmaceuticals, okay? Where we see open innovation really working is in the context of open source code, or as I think Aurelia mentioned, is open data, you know, where we can, you know, big data analytics in particular is largely a stack built on open source technologies and cloud computing. And since Linux, we haven't really seen sort of the massive big breakthroughs in European open source communities, even though the European Union as a whole, we have very strong open source initiatives in Horizon Europe, for instance, or we have very strong open data initiatives in Horizon Europe. But we're not necessarily, don't seem to be making the same strides as, for instance, China, India, and the US. And I think this might go back to Nicola's point, where our investment in data science, and I would say business analytics at the high school level and then going into the university level, particularly undergraduate level, I think that's incredibly important. And again, if I take the context of our business school in DCU, which is seen as at the forefront of data science, for instance, in Ireland, we just aren't producing enough graduates. We're not producing enough graduates at undergrad or postgrad, and it doesn't matter what function we are training people for, whether it's a HR director, whether it's a marketing person, whether it's a manufacturing person or a supply chain person, they all need data analytics, like they need statistics, like they need other kind of research methodologies and decision-making methodologies. And so for me, there's a big discussion about computer science, putting that in as a core subject in schools and in universities. For me, data science is much more powerful and distinctive for graduates than computer science as a wider space, because computer science is a very wide space, but business analytics and data science thinking or analytical thinking, I think that is an area where we still have an opportunity to do something and we can make progress. But it means moving away from the silo in the sciences and technology and moving it into the mainstream subjects in schools and particularly at university level. I can't see why arts and humanities and social science undergraduates shouldn't be studying data science and analytics. It makes no sense to me. They're the ones who can use that data to actually make changes in society. But I think that's a critical thing. I mean, if I was starting up my businesses now, that's where I would be doing it. It still might be an e-learning business, but it'd be an e-learning business with a lot of data science.
Good man, thank you very much, Theo. But the question was around the legal protections on.
But that's the key thing. Is it's the wrong question. You open sourcing it means you go back to the basic fundamentals of why IP law is put in place. It was put in place to create a commons where people could exploit IP. Only it turned into a situation where people want to control IP instead of freeing the IP. Open source software frees the IP around the software. It recognizes that no one can really own the function to print something on a printer. So actually, it answers your question because open source is actually just the other end of a loop. It's the other terminus to the original motivation for setting up IP law in the first place, is to free.
So are you saying that we should take all the IP lawyers and put them up against the wall and shoot them?
No, I think you should put the patent trolls up against the wall and shoot them. And then what
most of them in Texas, we have the guns for that.
I think, well, of course, it's a metaphorical one. But I think that the key thing here is I truly believe in opening up everything. I can't see the point in publishing in journals, for instance, that are closed. I can't see the point in universities keeping IP. I can't see the point in any kind of public funded project being closed to IP. I think it should all be opened up. I think if you're a pharmaceutical company and there's an investment threshold here where you're putting so much significant investment in, yeah, that makes sense. But that's a minute amount. For ICT particularly, I don't see a massive logic or legal argument for IP controls. And I don't even think you can do it.
Mm-hmm. If I can build on that,
Magda, if I might just sort of put it out there, the notion there to me is that any publicly funded research projects in Europe should have as one of the conditions for the funding that the IP is open and open source and everything, which sounds like it appeals to what we're talking about here in open innovation. But that just makes it easier for the Chinese or the Americans to steal our IP after our public money, our public investment. Or am I missing something? Magda, you were about to jump in. I don't know if that chimes with what you were about to say.
Yeah. I wanted to, let's say, being a lawyer myself, and let's say working with startups, definitely the question of IP is something that every investor looks at. Okay, so are you actually bringing something that is patentable, that is protectable? If you do not have a protectable business, and I operate in healthcare space, so this is also something very specific. But if you do not have something patentable, it's trade secrets and so on. They can kind of save you, but sometimes also for a very limited time. But there is a dichotomy. So I completely agree with you, James, that we are fighting, and let's say that this is so very much important for the investors and so on. However, if we look at the statistics, how many patents fall? So how many patents are actually prolonged after 20 years? How many companies are actually filing patents, they are being patent granted, but majority of them, a vast majority of them is not being prolonged. There is an option to prolong your patent beyond 20 years and people don't do it. So something happens. I think that we are living in times where the growth, the technology growth is so exponential that this IP protection model that we have in place, and the time that you need, 18 months or longer in order for your patent to be granted, etc. I mean, so many things can happen within 18 months in terms of technologies being developed and solutions being validated, etc. So it's no longer 70 years ago or where we saw one car being released every 5 years. We have new car models released every year. So the speed of innovation is incomparable to where we have started. So I think that we should be looking essentially at finding a better model for regulating this. And I'm totally with you, James, that we cannot open everything up because it's just a utopia that we're going to have everything open and by this we're going to solve all the problems. No, but for me the problem is that we are finding ourselves, let's say, competing within Europe. If we look at our IP regulations and so on. Sorry, no, gosh, kids at home. When we look at this, we have, if you want to file a patent in Europe, you have so many legislations to cover. Right? I mean, in the US, this is much simpler because you just have one market. So I think that regarding this, there are some lessons maybe that we could be taking at the policy and regulation level to make this simple, more simple, right? That the European Patent Office is maybe not solving all of the problems, but let's say the fact that we need to pay in for the patents in every single country, this is something maybe to be reconsidered.
But Magda,
Okay.
even when
We've got 4 minutes left. I'd like to allow Aurelia, Oana a minute each, and also Vice President Baer, and then we can close up. I'd like to get from each of you your number one thing that we need to change in Europe. So Aurelia, if you want to just step in there.
Yeah, I actually really like the discussion about the IP, but I think we should also not forget the small and medium-sized companies and the startups, and they can't really afford that much money for IP protection or patents, and they are the ones who really need to participate in open innovation. So back to your original question, James, how important open innovation is right now, I think it's not a nice to have anymore. I think it's a necessity, and we really need to do it, and especially the small and medium-sized companies, because on the way out of the crisis, and especially after the crisis, the business models and markets have been disrupted and changed, and they need to adapt. Just look at the automotive suppliers when it comes to change to electrical cars. So there's so much change, and I think with open innovation, we can actually make that change. But I think the question is not whether or how we protect our IP. It's more about how we build an ecosystem based on trust and long-term relationships. That the question is not first, before we're going to start a collaboration, how do we protect our IP, but rather getting to know each other, having the same mindset, the same shared values and beliefs. And if, especially for startups, if they don't have the money to invest first in IP protection, they should also be able to do open innovation. And this way, I think it's not about the IP, it's about how can we establish such an ecosystem. I think that's something we need to focus on.
Over to you, Oana. We're almost out of time.
No, definitely. So we established the ecosystem, but first we need to know who is in the ecosystem and who's relevant for us. Who should we work with in order to provide a certain benefit? And I fully agree. If I'm an SME or a very small company, or if I'm a tinkerer, I was reading this research about how home R&D is never quantified. We never know what is the value of maybe your grandpa sitting in the garage and coming up with, a great innovation maybe for the household. So for me, that is the number one thing that we should change. It's to understand capabilities and where they are. How do we find each other? Where are the hubs? And advertising those benefits. So for me, mapping the ecosystem that are really well described, that is the first. And unless we know who we are, who is capable of what, how we can come together to achieve bigger goals, then I think,
Great.
We won't be able to achieve that much.
Thank you. So before we do the straw poll, final word to Vice President Nicolas Baer.
Yes, I think you have to have the right balance for the patents, because I think this depends also on the branches. So I know it from the health branches. So there is a lot of private investment in it, and often failing of 5, 8, 9 ideas before one patent is coming through in the long process. And of course, this has to be a calculation that everything is going on. And of course, it has to come around with public money, that there is a consent on how the IP can be used afterwards, because there is public money in. But I think for private money, we have to look carefully. If it's a decision of their own and they see the advantages which were described here in the round, and then they will go for it. If not, so for me, it's also a question of property, not to force them by regulation. And we have those discussion on the TRIP waivers now for the vaccines. And I think that there, to cooperate in production, to make knowledge transfer, to build up enterprises in other parts of the world to produce with license those vaccines is more important, because of waiving the patent. It's not produced one dose, one jab of a vaccine in Asia or in Africa or South America. So I think this is really a complex system we have to look on, but going for more and more open source is important and should come along with public funded research and development. This is for sure for me.
Super, thank you. So everybody, I'd like you to just give your number one thing. It could be something to do with we need a better spirit of entrepreneurship, education. We need more open IP licensing or obligation on public money going into research that has to be open IP. It could be a change in improving our regulations. It could be that we need more venture capital cooperation. I'll go first. I think the biggest barrier, the biggest thing we need to change is mindset, and look to the world of the arts and culture to help us achieve that change in mindset. I will ask Magda, what's your number one?
I'm gonna second you, James, because I think it's important to remember that it's better to have 30% of something than 100% of nothing. So mindset is definitely something that we have to work on the most.
Professor Lynn.
Yeah, I'm going to go for something more tangible. I think we need to invest in helping particularly SMEs and micro enterprises to organize themselves to exploit innovations, which is a slightly, so I think organization to exploit, whether at a European, national, but a particular SME level, I think is critically important.
Anna Maria Pop.
Yeah, for me, it's the same. For me, it's professionalization. That's what I do on a daily basis. So knowing where to find what, who can work on what, upskilling, to me, that's it.
Maria Engelsberger.
I couldn't agree more how important the mindset is, but I would like to extend it, that it's about really capturing the mindset, measuring knowledge exchange on a team level, and not measuring open innovation at the organizational level.
Super. And finally, Vice President Bear.
For me, it's clearly the mindset. I'm really believing in people and their creativity, their ideas, and their possibility to go ahead, to be courage and curious, to have new ideas. And so I think we have to do everything which is supporting this. For example, that we not only, when we have to decide in politics or in an administration, we are not only are looking on the risk of a decision, because this is a normal principle we have for the moment, but that we install, for example, a principle of innovation. So if we do not decide in a certain manner, how many of opportunities we will not have for our citizens. And so I think this is really something we need to change, because without this attitude, without this mindset, not being always thinking about the risk, but more thinking and debating and working for the potential, for the opportunities, for the chances. This, I think, then everything was what said on the panel, and which was also totally right, will come along with that, because we're not only going into the field of research and into the field of thinkers and creatives, but also in the field of administrative, which has to put the frame out. But often then it's a block, and there is the hurdle. And I want to erase that in our European world, to be really front runner and taking leadership in the world.
Right, great. Thank you very much, Vice President Bear. And that's now the time up. It's too bad that we are not meeting in person. I would like to ask you to be available all maybe in 6 months' time to do this similar event again in person, maybe in Brussels. I think we can unlock a lot more value afterwards and before, and in sidebar conversations and everything. So that's it from us at United Europe. Do consider joining us. Go to our website. You can support us as individual members or as corporate members. So that's from me to you, Frau Aurelia Engelsberger and Nicola Bear. Vielen Dank. Magda, dziękuję. Juana Maria Pop, mulțumesc. Mes, and last but not least, Theolin Guraumila Margaret. Slán Gafol, and we'll see you next time at our next event. So thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.